Welcome to Critical Issues Commentary, the radio ministry of Twin City Fellowship, a non-denominational Christian church in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or on the web at cicministry.org. This is Dick Kuffel, your host for the next half hour. We're speaking today with Bob DeWaay, pastor of Twin City Fellowship and author of Critical Issues Commentary. Our topic today is why evangelicals are returning to Rome. What triggered this article, Robert?
An article in the February 2008 edition of Christianity Today. Somebody sent me that. One of my readers says, "Did you see that article?" I said, "Well, I don't get that magazine." And pretty soon here the magazine shows up in the mail. He sent it to me.
Oh, wow.
And on the front cover shows this guy digging up some sort of a Catholic icon. And that's the cover article. And then I get into the article, and it was written by a church history professor who was all excited about Protestant monasticism and Protestants going back to the medieval church to find new practices. And Christianity Today was all excited about how great this is, including the editor of the magazine. All right?
I saw that.
So then I wrote a shorter article for Christian Worldview Network. And it was titled Christianity Today Ditches Sola Scriptura, which means scripture alone.
Okay.
And I pointed out that when the magazine was founded, the editors were totally committed to that principle. It's a formal principle of the Reformation.
Yes.
All right. So on Christian Worldview Network, they have a feedback section so you can find out what everybody else thinks about it. And it was negative. The people read
To your article?
Yeah, it was negative. They were arguing against Sola Scriptura
Wow.
as even a reasonable principle. So then I was really alarmed. I thought just saying that Christianity Today departs from Sola Scriptura should raise alarms.
Yes.
Instead, people wanted to argue against Scripture alone on
Wow.
principle.
Wow.
So now I know we've got a problem in the entire church out there, and it's no wonder they're going back to Rome, because if you abandon the principles of the Reformation, you also abandon the reason for leaving Rome.
Exactly. The quote that you used out of Christianity Today was Mark Galli, he's the editor, Mark Galli's quote that said, "While the ancient church has captivated the evangelical imagination for some time, it hasn't been until recently that it's become an accepted fixture of the evangelical landscape, and this is for the good." I thought, my goodness, first of all, captivated the evangelical imagination.
Unbelievable.
That implies what?
Okay, this is a product of all this postmodern stuff that's come in that we can't know. Okay, we really can't know what the Bible means anyhow, and people have debated what the Bible means, so obviously you can't really know. It's how they think.
Yes.
And we're becoming more mystical rather than cognitive.
Yes.
We don't want somebody telling us truth from the pulpit that we're supposed to think about and then apply to our lives. We don't like that. We want an experience. We want to smell the incense and hear the bells ringing and see the sights, have our 5 physical senses involved in our worship experience. So Protestantism really doesn't have a lot to offer because we've always been word-centric because of the Reformation.
Yes.
So if we're going to learn how to have this tangible, mystical experience in church, why spin our wheels trying to come up with something new? Rome has done this for thousands of years. Let's just go learn from them.
Okay.
And then the next step is, well, why bother with that? Why don't we just go to Rome and join them?
Okay. When they make the statement, become an accepted fixture of the evangelical landscape, does that mean that this thing is so embedded now that it's actually, that's fine?
Absolutely. The seminary that I graduated from is now fully into this. It was coming in when I graduated. Now it's gone. I wouldn't send anybody there.
But that's not that many years ago. You graduated in 99, right?
Exactly.
9 years ago. Wow.
It's just gone. It's gone over to the postmodern. And so once they do that, Scripture alone is no longer even on the radar. And when you bring it up, people's eyes glaze over because they're so far removed from what the concept is and why it's necessary that they don't get it.
Wow. I'm taking a couple lines directly out of your paper just because they really struck me when you did this introduction. But Chris Armstrong is the author of the article you were talking about, and he promotes the trip back to the ancient church and claims that because the movement is led by such persons as Dallas Willard, Richard Foster, and living and practicing monks and nuns, Therefore, they're receiving good guidance.
Yeah. And then he says Christ is guiding the process. Now, talk about throwing Scripture alone out the window.
Yes.
By whose authority does he say Christ is telling us to go back to the Roman Catholic Church?
Or outside the Word. Yes.
Well, he didn't get it from the Scripture.
No,
Well, so it's good. Now, how do we know it's good?
we don't.
Okay. Especially, here's the thing that really amazes me. They're going back to the Middle Ages when
Yes.
these things were rampant in the monasteries
Yes.
and what have you. This is the worst time in church history. This is when all these atrocities were going on. Read church history. Read about the Crusades. Read about more than one pope at the same time warring with one another. Read about all the illegitimate children around Rome fathered by popes. Okay, that was the Middle Ages. Now,
That's
I know
true.
Catholics are mad. Nobody's perfect or whatever they might say about that.
Yep.
And that was ancient history. But this is what we had when these things were invented. Where's the fruit? And was there reason for the Reformation? Did Luther just decide to have a Reformation because he had a bad disposition, or was there reason for it? Okay, if there's reason for it, then how do we end up with Scripture alone? Because we needed a formal principle of theology. Because the issue is this: who speaks for God? Who speaks for God in an authoritative and binding manner?
That's actually the core issue here.
That's what we're going to talk about.
Yes.
Who speaks for God? Now, the Catholic Church claimed that there were a succession of apostles who sit in the seat of Peter and speak authoritatively for God
Yes.
at times.
Yes.
All right?
Yes.
I've recently published an article about the New Apostolic Reformation where we quoted Clement of Rome, proving that that wasn't true and that Clement was never a pope and he didn't know himself to be a pope and he didn't recognize any apostles but the true ones
Yes.
that Christ appointed.
Yes.
So they don't have an argument, okay?
Yes.
And then all of these practices, the indulgences, purgatory, the abusive things that Luther witnessed, okay?
Mm-hmm.
How's he going to fight it? Okay, if the Pope or the councils or the teaching magisterium determines bindingly what can be believed, what we must follow, and we say indulgences are good. Okay? People are going to buy their relatives out of purgatory, and that's how we're going to build our St. Peter's Basilica. Okay?
Yes.
How do you fight it?
Scripture. It's the only way you can do it, because if you try to fight that, you got
They
nothing.
say we're the church.
Yes.
And if you don't like it, we'll banish you or kill you or burn you at the stake.
Yes.
All right?
Good.
So Scripture alone was the only way to reform the church. And plus, I believe that it's a true idea, and we'll write some future articles about it, because at the end of this, I want to tell you what's happened after I wrote this article. But
Okay.
it's unbelievable. People actually want to go back to Rome, and they do not believe Scripture alone, and they're willing to argue against it.
Well, let's speak specifically, and this is just more for almost like a soundbite kind of a answer, but Sola Scriptura, what is it? Where did it come from? Why is it important?
Okay. The issue is who speaks authoritatively, inerrantly, and bindingly for God.
Okay.
Who? How does God bring his word to man?
Okay, now there are two camps.
Okay. The Protestant camp used to be Scripture alone. And why? Well, because we've gone through this and other things, but it has to be reiterated. How did God speak so that we got the Old Testament canon? Well, he appeared and spoke face to face in a theophany to Moses.
Yes.
We've talked about that before.
Yes.
Moses gave the parameters so that after Moses, they know who was a true prophet and who wasn't.
Yes.
And they're found in Deuteronomy 18, Deuteronomy 13. They must always be accurate, always be correct in their predictions, and they must not teach us to go after a God we have not known. Moses was the lawgiver, and the prophets are people who spoke to the theocratic kingdom that God created based on the law of Moses.
Okay.
That ended in Malachi, and the Jews knew it ended, as we said before in other shows. Okay?
Yes.
They knew during the time of the Maccabees, those weren't scriptures they were writing. They didn't think they were.
Yes.
And they said, we'll wait until a prophet comes. That prophet was John the Baptist, who was predicted in Malachi. So there's no prophet on the face of the earth speaking inerrantly and bindingly for God for 400 years.
Okay.
And they had enough sense